Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to No Buzzwords. Thanks for tuning in on YouTube, Facebook, whatever else we're on, Spotify. Like, subscribe, all that garbage. We have no Adam because he's a good husband and father, and his wife needed him to do a thing with the kids. So we're happy to not have him, even though it makes us a little sad. But we do have Sir Daniel Frederick, Pastor Frederick.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Former executive director of Coffee Oasis, Daniel Frederick.
Yeah, not retired, but former, yes.
Oh.
I'm still working,
yes,
so I think technically not retired, but it's in good hands.
Right. Okay, I see what you're saying. Right, not retired, still working, formally this.
Correct.
Okay, roger that. So
One job, not two jobs. That's where I'm at.
Okay, so you were, that's right, you were doing pastoring and running Coffee Oasis.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, we can get into that. You were on a roll. You were telling me something about your father.
Oh, yeah. To pick up listeners, we were just going to do a deep dive on my father-in-law, and this is not the juicy news of him getting engaged and getting married in November, which is exciting. But a year ago,
to him,
we're excited for him.
Scott. Congratulations,
Hendon.
Scott.
So if you search Scott Hendon and put in Scott Hendon superintendent, the Kitsap Sun broke a news story on my own father-in-law a little over a year ago. We were reading the newspaper and reading this really fascinating article about the superintendent ripping up no bond signs, or they were trying to levy a bond. I think it was a bond. Ripping them up and stealing them. And so already a fascinating article. And we read down, she was caught because someone had put game cams up because someone was stealing their signs. Turns out it was the superintendent because they hid in the woods waiting for this person to go past because they couldn't identify them on the game cams. Well, that person was my father-in-law. We learned halfway through the article. Superintendent led him on this wild goose chase through town as they followed her in their vehicles. The story is amazing, involving the police. She pulls up to the Rotary meeting, literally goes into the Rotary meeting. Police go in after her. She won't leave the Rotary meeting. She's denying the whole thing. They find gloves by her car with grease on them because he'd greased his signs. And then the signs with grease on them in the dumpster next to her vehicle.
Oh boy.
So fascinating story.
Jeez.
But yeah, Scott took down the superintendent in North Kitsap School District. Wow. He is a legend in our parts. Because the game cam, get this, has a recording of her stopping her truck, getting out, ripping up the signs, not just throwing them in the back of her truck, but smashing them on the ground, throwing them down, stomping on them, and then jumping back in the truck.
Dude, signs are a real issue with some people. I don't know. I've fallen down a couple of YouTube rabbit holes of people ripping up Trump signs, Kamala signs, any kind of sign. You put up a sign in support of anything or anyone. There's somebody.
I think they just feel like fair game. You know, they aren't. It's actually a crime. For those listening, it's a crime.
Sure, yeah. But I have a feeling most people will get away with it. So the trend will probably continue.
I've witnessed driving people ripping up signs. But
jeez.
We've all wanted to do it. Let's admit it. Let's confess that now before one another and God.
It could be a blank sign. I'm just waiting for the day that there's a blank sign with nothing on it for me to rip up and just kind of know what it feels like.
Yeah.
Finally.
I saw a hilarious picture on Instagram, which was this person standing by a marathon saying, "You also could have chosen therapy." So, I think there are ways to be redemptive with signage. Take the sign back.
Take the sign. Or maybe since it's just, since we have a few years before the next big election, we can just put out signs that are free game. Signs just saying, hey,
just put your name here.
Yeah, here's a free shot. Pull over, do whatever you want to this sign. We know you need it. We know you want it. So no consequences.
So there's a story of my father-in-law. That's
Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Daniel.
Absolutely.
So how's your life?
Good. Yeah, really good. Lots changed recently,
right,
as you indicated earlier. Went from 2 jobs to 1 this year. For those who
that
don't,
was that recent.
Yeah, that recent. So, yeah, I'll give you kind of a quick look into the last year. We just hit a year anniversary at the Refuge Church of having merged 2 churches. The Refuge Church, which my family started, was just a little house church the same time we started Coffee Oasis back in 96. 96, Hope in Christ Ministries started. We bought Hope in Christ Ministries bought Coffee Oasis in 97. But right around that time, we had this little house church, which grew into Refuge Church today. So they kind of grew up as these sibling organizations, and Coffee Oasis would go on to be in 5 locations in Kitsap and Pierce County, serving homeless youth, 2 of the 6 underage youth shelters in all of Washington State. And so this kind of ballooned into a pretty healthy sized, medium-sized organization. At the peak, I had about 90 staff. That was right around the COVID time. Everything went wonky around there, but it really stabilized.
Great time to peak.
Yeah, PPP was helpful. We really got through COVID well. We saw people investing in organizations that they were passionate about. So, and COVID was a crazy time personally, and then at the church as well. My father was diagnosed with cancer, and we had a slew of both weddings and births at our church. So we had a number of weddings. My wife and I got married 2019, so right before COVID. And
same with me.
Yeah, there we go. Congratulations. There we go.
Yeah. July.
5 years.
Well done.
So we saw this baby boom at our church. In the last 5 years, we've had over 50 kids born.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
50 kids.
Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting.
And so coming out of COVID, we'd grown substantially as a church. The mean age range went down tremendously. So we had all these kids. Weren't able to fit them where we had been meeting at the Coffee Oasis. So we started looking around. We'd recently joined the Christian Missionary Alliance denomination, and that's been an awesome partnership.
Never heard of it. Christian
and Missionary Alliance. Yeah, it's over 100 years old. You should get out more.
Oh gosh.
No, it really struck a chord with us. The way we had started really coming out of mission was similar to the way the Christian and Missionary Alliance Church had started. It started as a mission to dock workers in New York, and grown around the world, really driven by mission. So there's about 600,000 people in the U.S. who are part of the denomination, but over 6 million worldwide. And so it really is taken seriously, the Great Commission. So we were looking for a network or a denomination. We're kind of taking a few rabbit trails here, but found that as we were looking to the future, knowing my dad.
That is such a cool way to determine a denomination, because I feel so you're telling me that the Refuge was founded sort of independently, non-denominational.
We had been non-denominational for 24 years, 5 years.
And then you joined a denomination.
Yeah, we did.
That's cool.
Yep.
That's really cool. As opposed to just being steeped in something by virtue of, having, somebody starting that who knows how many generations ago, and you just stick with it. Yeah,
it was really good, and I think the right dose of humbling to have grown these what had become 2 organizations, 2 separate nonprofits,
the Refuge and
Coffee Oasis, and I think very healthy and on the right track, staying true, seeing year over year tremendous growth, and then to then get to choose. Let's link arms with some people. And so we actually had initially thought network, which felt like well, we're not making a huge commitment. We're just saying we're on the same page and we're going the same direction. But network after network, and there's great ones out there, but
I don't know what that.
So there's a number of networks out there. The big one around here is Acts 29.
Oh,
so
okay.
Just church where you affiliate with a group of people that will share certain values and beliefs.
But doctrinally, you have a little more freedom.
Yes and no. I think there's core doctrinal statements to each one. But when it comes to the infrastructure, like the support legally if something comes up, which in our day and age is really important. I can go on, but just the administrative and logistical support for a church like us that at the time I was a bivocational pastor, had grown the church with my dad, and he, stage 4 cancer, we knew was going to be passing away soon. So looking to the future, I really had to start thinking, what is this going to look like for my kids? And so we looked at networks, and then denominations. Was running with a buddy of mine who was a local pastor at another Christian and Missionary Alliance church. And he wasn't even trying to sell me on the denomination. He was describing how the recent district conference they had was just a time of spirit-filled worship. And that was an indicator for me, like, look into this more. You don't often hear people talking about their denomination in a way that's like, I went to a large gathering of my denomination, and usually you hear someone share something controversial, or we're voting on these crazy things, and it wasn't that. It was we worshiped together, and he left refreshed. So we looked into it. I knew very little about it. Turns out there was all these connections even from within our church, especially on the mission field, people who had been on the mission field and worked alongside, including my parents. I was born in the Philippines, and part of their team, translation team, there were missionaries from the Christian and Missionary Alliance.
No kidding.
And then I had random people coming up saying, I never thought.
So you've been flirting with them your whole life.
You didn't even know it. So people had said, I was really skeptical when you talked about partnering with a network or denomination.
Your church members were saying that. People
from our church, because they loved it. They're like, why change if this is good and we like it and it's growing? All the things that say just stay the course. And so we...
what did initiate that? It was just this conversation you had with your friend who had that experience?
No, that had come after our decision too. I told our elders they could bring, but I would bring. I found about a dozen networks that we could partner with, that I thought we would align with enough. It came down to, at least with the networks, that so many of them are so young, they're still making mistakes, and that is a real bad generalization. I know people who are in networks, love networks, they've been well-resourced, done church planning with them. So not throwing shade at networks here, but we'd been around 28 years, which was longer than a lot of the networks. And so they didn't really provide that we were looking to someone who could help with the path ahead also. And so that's where I had this conversation with my buddy. Like this morning, we were up at Mount Walker at 5 a.m. running up the mountain. So it was one of those Mount Walker runs at 5 a.m. Like this morning, probably in the rain and cold that he was telling me about this experience at the district conference. So started walking down that path and have really loved being a part of the denomination. Why that's an important segue is when we were all climbing out of COVID and had gone from, a couple services down to just a few people in a room with some recording equipment. Right. We were climbing our way out now with this, feeling like we're doing the Exodus with all these babies. We were wondering how to do that well, how to do that in a way that our families would be cared for, because the Coffee Oasis had no great area where we were meeting, had no great area for kids to be cared for. This is what our announcement sounded like every Sunday. And if you have kids from 1 to 3 years old, you can go across the parking lot to the downstairs of the administration building. And if you're a parent, the idea of walking your child across a parking lot and leaving them in a building that, that looks like a building that is one of the original Bremerton Chamber of Commerce building. Like, this is very old, it wasn't a great feeling.
Lifeless government buildings.
And we had people time after time tell us, we love the Refuge, but it doesn't feel like a great fit for our kids.
That's a big,
thing. Those comments have never been something that, I'm never the building's on fire. It's knowing, especially for myself, I had a very limited means to lead huge change in either of these, because I was leading both organizations. But as a part of the denomination, we started kind of looking around, and I'd reached out to the pastor at Chico Alliance Church, right down the road from us, and had been told that the church, an older church, and kind of slowly turning around after COVID. And so I was told by the denomination, hey, don't come in hot. Like, we had a lot of people, and they were like, don't come in and overwhelm them. And so I had just not reached out to him for like 6 months after we had joined. Maybe less than, maybe 4 months. Maybe I'm exaggerating my grace period, but
longer than advised.
But we had reached out to some other churches to see if we could share space. Didn't work. And so finally reached out to Jared. And I had been told I'd never walked through the building. Best I'd like driven past the building. And so I sat down with him and I said, hey, I hear you have a gym, and I was wondering if we could rent your gym, not trying to encroach. Maybe you could meet in the sanctuary. We can meet in the gym. And he goes, I don't think that's going to work. And if you know Jared, great guy, but you can't really tell what's going on in his mind. Hard to read guy. And then he paused, and I thought, well, at least we have an encouraging coffee. We're both CNMA pastors in the area. And he goes, it would make a lot more sense if we just gave you guys the building and joined your church. Whoa. So that was his leadoff statement. Whoa. This is late fall going into winter of 2023.
You had no expectation of that.
No expectation of that. And so I said, well, I'm not sure we want a building. With Coffee at the time, I had 9 buildings and knew that buildings can be a headache. And we'd been a mobile church for house church, mobile church, whatever, for over 2 decades. So, here we were being offered a 25,000 square foot building.
Wow.
Full gym. They have a childcare that serves the community well.
More than you were looking for.
Far more than I was looking for. But, God does things like that.
But you were looking for it because you were growing.
Yeah, we were looking for space. We weren't necessarily looking to own the space.
Right.
And so brought that back to the elders, and it was interesting to see how that progressed, because I think there was a lot more skepticism on our side going in. There was a lot of eagerness on their side, eagerness to have children in the building. The Chico Alliance Church had just a really rich history. They've been around, I don't think quite 100 years yet, but I think they're well over 80. So they have a very long history. Marvelous history. I mean, you have people there that helped build the sanctuary still. We just lost an old saint who we were able to record some stories of him talking about being a part of the building, as they built 2 different buildings. First the gym and childcare area, and then the sanctuary.
That's so cool.
So we're just inheriting not just a building, we're inheriting a history. Wow. And that's a lot to be given. It's a lot to steward well. So here I was having meetings with my elders on one side and then their leadership team on the other side. Their leadership team, I was basically getting interviewed because they were both giving us a building worth almost $5 million and then wondering, do they want this guy to pastor them? So not only they're giving this building, but
double full-time,
knowing full well that I am a full-time executive director. So every 3 weeks or so, I'd go like preach at Chico, and I was preaching at Refuge.
Oh, wow.
And Chico was just kind of falling in love with the Refuge Church. It was beautiful to see them really full on embrace us. And we came down to one meeting with the leadership team from Chico, and there's still some skeptical people. And I got asked, how is this not going to be a hostile takeover? And I said, I'm still not sure that we want your building. So we're not taking over. Like, we're trying to discern really if this is what God has for us, because we've been pretty happy where we're at. This is something big to.
And they were concerned about their culture. Maybe.
They were concerned about their history more than their culture.
Okay.
The culture had got to the place where I think they were very eager for a new culture. But they wanted, as they should, because there's so much, so much to honor there. I think they wanted to make sure that we weren't just going to come in and ignore the past, but honor the past. And we were so delighted to do that. What felt like a long time really sped up.
Thing, coming in and adopting somebody's history on their behalf. I the way you described it, that's a whole new mental image that you're painting in my head. I've never really conceived of.
So, thanks for pointing that, because it really is a delight. I think it's taken. It's a gift we couldn't ask for. You can't walk in and say, give us your building.
Well, and I don't think that people's. I feel like in that situation, generally speaking, the notion is to rewrite
you're correct.
In favor of the future.
Most of the books you read, because I read a handful of books. I just was consuming literature on merges. And we use the word merge intentionally because a certain part of it has to be a takeover, meaning there's a part of it, and the books will recommend part of it the old part of the old has to die. And so some people will say, the old church needs to do, or the church that has inhabited the building needs to do their own funeral. Because there is a part of it that you can't have over and over again people saying, well, we used to do it this way. People need to know that it is the Refuge. The culture of the Refuge is why this church has been growing. It's the way God shaped us. And so that needs to be a 100% adoption. While then you're also grafting in this history.
Grafting is the word that was floating in my head. I was like, grafting. And
so I'll give you an
such
example
a biblical
of that.
Word.
Yeah. It's what God's constantly doing with us, and every new person who puts faith in Jesus is like,
it's just you're kind of blowing my mind in because the idea of, for me as a Christian, the idea of being adopted for a new future, for a salvation that I'm looking forward to, but to hear you talk about grafting that treasures somebody's past, a group's past.
Yeah.
I'll
give you two examples that have blown me away. There's so filled with goodness, and what I mean by that is that rich, gracious gift that you just are a part of. And I experienced this twice this last week in two stories. Chico has lost three. One is in hospice now. Kind of founding pillar members of the church. One, Vern Godfrey, we sat and we were helping prepare for his memorial.
One Vern?
Vern
Vern.
is his name, Vern Godfrey. Godly man. I got to visit him in the hospital before he passed. And this is a guy who's seen many pastors come through, not as many as some churches. Virginia let me know I was the 7th pastor because in her mind, I'm just following in this line of pastors from Erland's Point Church that had to move because the freeway was going right through the property, and they moved to what is now Chico Alliance, and I'm the next one in that line of pastors.
Wow.
The amazing thing is that they're so joy-filled to be a part of Refuge, but there's no place one stops and the other starts. They're just part of one story, and that's exactly what I hoped would be. When I did sort of our inaugural sermon, I talked about the Refuge history now doesn't just go back 25 years. It goes back however many years.
Cool
Our history goes
that's
back.
So cool.
I did the math at that point, 80, 90 years. And so now the story we tell has a way longer tail on it.
Wow.
So really beautiful for her to honor me in that way and to see me as the 7th pastor of the church. Knowing at the same time she's so delighted it now has this name, the Refuge. Because what we talked about the whole time is I told the church this. I told the Refuge and Chico, let's stop focusing on the name on the sign, because by God's grace, people will still be worshiping here in 100 years, and then the name of that sign probably won't be Refuge Church. And so all we are, right, is stewards along the way.
Right.
Now the other story, which is fantastic, is the story of Bob Molman, who is stories you read about. This man, years ago, his wife, started experiencing memory loss with dementia that led to her inability to even remember to eat or drink. Yeah. So cared for her until 2 years ago. She went into a memory care facility, but she refuses to eat from anybody else but Bob, even though she doesn't remember Bob.
Wow.
And so he's been caring for her for years, 3 times a day, then going in to feed her.
Oh my goodness.
Morning, midday and evening. And she doesn't remember him. And so 12 days ago, she stopped eating and drinking even from him. So she's in hospice, and usually someone only lasts a week like that. But here we're, as a church, caring for Bob. But a couple months ago, Bob asked if Deli could become an honorary member, his wife, because he said she would so love the Refuge Church. So just really wanted to make sure she could be a member, so that in her obituary they could put, Deli is a member of the Refuge Church. So just these gifts, as a pastor too, of people willing to be pastored by someone 70 years younger than they are. And I guess that would make some of them 110. So maybe not 70, but
I wasn't going to ask. I wasn't going to. You could have gotten away with it.
But yeah, I mean, a gift that, we just never asked for, because you can't really. And yet they've been so delighted to give it. So that's kind of brought us to, here I am pastoring the Refuge, executive director of Coffee Oasis, and
2003 or 23.
2024 is when we merged, March 2024. So we literally just had our 1 year in the building. We went from Coffee Oasis. Thank you. Yeah, the journey is still in the works. So we went from Coffee Oasis, and they were in the sanctuary. And the first Sunday, March 17th, we meet in the gym, intentionally, to take everybody out of their zones of comfort and put them all in a new space. And so 57 weeks now is the count we've been remodeling the gym and as cafe space that are gorgeous. And we're hopefully just 2 to 3 months out from being back there.
So you're remodeling the sanctuary. And while you're doing that, you're meeting in the gym. Is that what
we're meeting
you're
in
saying?
The gym?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a full service childcare downstairs that's all week long. So the building's very actively used throughout the week. But in terms of Sunday worship, we're still doing this kind of mobile church.
Wow.
And have experienced amazing growth even in the gym. We tried to do it kind of covert, just so these two groups could get to know each other. And the crazy thing is, everybody is new here, but everybody feels like they're the outsider, right? So everybody new.
Meaning the Chico people feel new to Refuge. So Refuge feels new to Chico.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
But everybody feels like the outsider, meaning everyone thinks the other person feels more at home. So everybody coming from Chico thinks because we have the name Refuge, everyone from the Refuge just feels like it's their place. Now the Refuge, because they're out of the Coffee Oasis and they're in historically Chico's building, that those individuals should feel more at home. So here we are.
Wow, everybody feels like an orphan.
Everybody feels like an orphan. And our only commonality, we keep coming to us, the only thing we share is Jesus. That is the way it should be. So it's reestablishing our identity in a way which has been a beautiful, beautiful process. And so we preached a couple weeks on our values as a church, and then swung right into the book of Acts. And,
nice.
So here we are in June, end of June, early July. We're preaching Acts 6, and I'm all out. I've got 3 kids. One, at that point, 1 6-month-old, 1-year-old, and my 3-year-old. So
and 2 jobs.
So we're all out. My wife's a wedding photographer, and she's killing it.
3 jobs.
And
3 kids, 3 jobs, 2 people.
And God just giving us enough, but knowing, just remaining open to what He has, knowing that our friends think we're crazy. And
I think you're crazy. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah. But man, then we swing into Acts 6, and I'm preaching, and it was like in the moment. How many times I've read that in the moment, though, reading that in preparation for it. And just felt this release to let go of Coffee Oasis, because Acts 6 is this. You have the disciples, the apostles now, who they're trying to do it all, and realize that they're dropping the ball. Certain widows aren't getting cared for. Right, so you have this disagreement in Acts 6 of the Grecian widows and the Jewish widows, and they're just Hellenistic widows, I think. But they're just wondering, hey, we were supposed to have our food and we're not getting our food. The disciples, with best intentions, just aren't able to do it all, because the ministry's growing and people are coming to know Jesus, and so they prayerfully raise up new leaders, and it just felt like permission to raise up leadership for the Coffee Oasis. And so it took no more than a week. Hannah and I praying, and
but I mean, the apostles in that moment also cut off the extra that they were trying to do. They were like, okay, I'm taking on too much. I need to focus in on.
They said prayer and teaching. Yeah, they're like, this is what I got to do.
I got to dial it back on all these other things.
And they're raising people full of the Spirit who ended up being powerful, preachers. Second longest sermon in the Bible is Stephen, who's one of those guys that they've raised up. And so,
what's the first longest?
Jesus. Yeah, he got Sermon
on the Mount. Okay.
Yeah. So you got these amazing, godly, gifted people that are getting raised up. It's not like second string. They're just recognizing, as the church is growing, God's gonna be raising up godly leaders, and allowing them to focus on where God's pointed them to be. And so felt freed to let go of Coffee Oasis, and it continues to surprise Hannah and I how completely that felt. For my family, we'd been doing it 27 years, taking it from just literally a ministry called Hope and Cross Ministry in our home to growing it to a pretty good sized organization, and just felt release. And so I brought that to Hannah, and there was no hard questions, no concerns. It was just confirmation. So The very funny part of it and nerve-wracking was I wrote a letter that I could give both to the board of Coffee Oasis and the board of elders, and which was essentially resigning from one and telling the other, "Hey, I think you need to hire me."
Wow, that's quite the letter.
Because I'd been leading the church for 14 years, but wasn't drawing a salary from it. And so saying, "Hey, that's
awesome.
This is what God's doing," and so pretty dramatic for the board, and it was very cool to see how God provided. I gave him till the end of the year, and
of 2024.
2024.
Yeah,
and God showed he'd been raising somebody up right there in our organization, and he's done a great job.
Mr. Clark.
Yeah, Bryce Clark.
Yeah. We're going to have him on in a couple of weeks, I think.
Cool. Yeah, he's a good dude. I had, apologies to Chris Clark, his dad, I had poached him from Chris like 3 years earlier. His dad started Children of the Nation. And so I called.
His dad started Children of the Nation?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So
that's a name drop.
Bryce was working for him, and I called him up and I was like, "Hey man, I need someone to lead my development team. You gonna come over and work for me?" So that was a sweet 3 years we worked together, and that was kind of still in hushed tones. I mean, we decided, I had given it to the board. No one else in the organization knew yet. And I said, "Hey man, this is kind of out of left field probably, but this is what's going down. And do you have any interest in this?" And I thought,
wow, so Bryce is no rookie.
Yeah, no rookie, but has a pretty amazing story of his own of coming to faith, really, growing up in a ministry home, but taking the prodigal route. I mean, you'll hear when he's on your show. And so it really was a perfect fit coming in there. And then I read the letter to the church, and the funny thing is you don't really know what decision I'm going to make till halfway through the letter. So the whole church thinks I'm resigning. I'm stepping down from pastoring the church, and you can hear a pin drop, and then people were excited that that's where my attention
keep them on the edge of their seats.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that was a long-winded story, but that was kind of bringing us through that wild season to just one job. So now I get to go one place every day, and it's great.
I think a lot of the criticism, and there's plenty of criticism of our faith all around us, but one of them is the incredible amount of denominations and the, what most people would call a schism, and they're happening all the time. And the, Adam would have a funny joke if he were here, but he I haven't consumed any of this content, but there's some, I don't know if it's a TikTok or an Instagram account that he watches, but it's called like, "How's the Reformation Going?" And it's a Catholic TikTok or something like that. And it's, it's not hard to pull up.
Catholics throwing shade.
Yeah.
Don't know if you want to start that game.
Right. But it's not hard. It's just not hard to find some wild misbehavior,
with humanity.
With humanity. Yeah. But, within the, our many Protestant traditions, my wife and I have different histories and different traditions. And so there was we had to navigate, me coming from a Baptist background, her coming from a Churches of Christ background. And hearing about a church come into a denomination, but also your story is clearly a story of unity as well. So what some people see as evidence of division and unhealth, perhaps, you guys, your story is one of coming together, one of finding unity. And even though you're finding this denomination and choosing to align with it, I guess I'm interested on your overall thoughts as a shepherd of the church, as a pastor. That's just been something that's on my mind, is the overall unity. My wife and I haven't necessarily landed in agreement, because there are some theological differences from her tradition and my tradition, and we've found enough common ground and even strength in our disagreement. As someone who has a much heavier load on his shoulders in regards to that, because you're thinking of a flock, and how does that flock interact with all the other flocks and with the greater church? And I'm interested in your thoughts on the overall health, because a lot of people would say, my assumption is, and maybe I'm wrong, is the movement towards non-denominations, I don't know if I'm right in assuming that was a bit of a trend for a while. I don't know if it still is, but the non-denominational kind of thing was a response to the wealth of denominations that sprung out of the Protestant faith. I don't know. I'm
I think there's a few
asking this question with too many words.
No, that's all right. I'll answer, and feel free to focus the answer. One of the things I hear you saying, and I referenced earlier, is why if we were a healthy non-denominational church, why would we join a denomination? Especially when denominations get a terrible rap. Right. And I get that, and I never thought we would join a denomination. If you had asked me 3 years ago if I would ever join a denomination, I would say
bad idea.
Why if we have a good thing going, why would we do that? I do feel tremendous responsibility as a leader to take serious, as each leader should, what I'm modeling. And I think when people have something healthy, successful, by different metrics, the idea is I've become the new standard. And so, what do you do then? Do you create your own denomination? Because our hope is to church
I figured it out.
Yeah, so, I figured it out. Come follow me now. Right. Just as much as we all have different church names, denominations have different names. The Bible is pretty clear that Christ isn't divided. And so at the end of the day, all those things are different names. The question is, are we worshiping God? I was reading a book recently. I get in pastoral counseling, I get to talk to young men a lot about purity. And I'm reading a great book on it right now. Can't remember the title, but it was talking about how, in the Sermon on the Mount, it doesn't offer us all these different boundaries that we oftentimes put up. True love waits, or do this or that. What it does is it comes back to our hearts and says the pure of heart will see God. It's not the person who does these things or checks these boxes will see God. It's the pure of heart, which feels a little ambiguous. I think we'd like something a little more concrete than that.
Sure.
At the end of the day, that's actually the truest metric, and it's a metric actually before God, not before each other. And I think the same thing, whether we joined a denomination or not, what the denomination was called, what we were looking for was, I didn't really feel interested in recreating the wheel if there were healthy people we could link arms with. And I felt like that in itself was kind of a check on my pride, because, as you can see from what my family's done, I feel like we're pretty good at starting things and rallying people.
Follow through, for sure.
And just to go, what does it look like to be a part of something that obviously has been true to the mission? And
bit of an act of submission.
Yeah. And because everything I've even shared in our story, like us looking just to rent a building and someone giving it to us, or, the story goes on. Like, I feel like when we're following God faithfully, he could have been like, plant churches and do this. I think the invitation more than anything was God just saying, be a part of my people. And this was a great opportunity to do that. So I don't know. I think maybe the flack a lot of denominations get is probably by and large from people that have commitment issues.
Do you think we're more unified than we get credit for? Or do you think there's a fair amount of division?
Oh, yeah.
I guess on a spectrum of totally divided and totally unified. Are we smack dab in the middle?
I don't think we do. I think Christians are very cannibalistic. I don't think we do a good job talking well of one another. I think if you get down to it, by and large, it does come back to the heart. Are we worshipers of Jesus? And because you can find people of all stripes of denominations that are all over on the spectrum. I've sat in with buddies who are part of different denominations, and they just mock non-denominational people because they have no covering. And then you're like, well, look at the scandals in the churches with covering. Covering, meaning like you have leadership over you that's holding you accountable.
Sure.
Yeah, that's the nomenclature of the denomination. No, it's in the scripture though. This idea of coming under people to be accountable,
right.
But that's just silliness. Like, I mean, if you talk about a denomination with the strictest covering, you're looking at the Catholic Church, and I think we all know that explosion of morality that happened there, and that's not saying it's unique to them. And we just saw what happened with this Southern Baptist convention. And so the moment we start looking at other people and comparing who's been more faithful to God, that's just a recipe for our own hearts to be unfaithful. So
wow.
Well
said. That's heavy.
I'm just, I guess at the end of the day, it's not about denomination. It's, are we together showing people Jesus, because no one's going to remember me in 50 years. How old am I?
Oh, come on. I'll give you at least 100.
70, 100 years. Let's say 100 years. And neither do I hope they will, I mean, what we want is people to remember the name of Jesus, and we carry our burden so much lighter when that's what we want. There's so many pastors that are just burdened, and a lot of that burden is because they feel like it's all riding on them, rather than like, man, let's just hope that people, when they leave here, it's so funny, man. I'll preach some Sundays. People have come up the next week and they'll be like, that was a great message. Were you here? And then I remember I was the guy preaching, like that.
Nice.
That is success.
I've never heard of that happening to a pastor.
Oh, for sure. I've spoken at camps and come back the next year, and literally this happened to me. I was like playing chess with this kid. He was like, I gave my life to Jesus last year, and I think he's gonna like follow up. I was younger, maybe hadn't you had appreciated the fact that I it's good to be forgettable, but no, the kid was like, man, so impacted last year and gave my life to Jesus, still walking faithfully. And literally he looked at me straight in the eye. He was like, were you here last year?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I think that actually, if I'm going to point at something that was one of the healthiest points of ministry, just have to walk through that and realize like, that's actually the goal.
Wow.
I hope the culture of the Refuge is, it has been.
He didn't remember you, he remembered Christ.
Yeah. And I hope it continues to be.
And hopefully that's a testament to the
I hope so. Yeah.
Preaching.
No, genuinely, one of my goals for our church is that no one knows who I am until I walk up on the stage to preach. I think there's such a desire to be known, noticed, especially in our influencer age. Like, what does it look like that? And I say this from the pulpit all the time. Like the word people get might be from the person next to them today. The person that might be praying for them and they might experience healing from is the person next to them. Like if you just turn to them and share, like, hey, this was my week. And And we're just missing out on harvesters, right? If we continue having this front centric church. So
you mean like as a senior pastor, not empowering?
Yeah.
The
So
harvesters,
empowering literally everybody in the church. So many times I've preached on prayer, knowing that there's probably a dozen people in my church that are far better at it than I am. Probably more than a dozen. I have some saints at the church. And so how often we need to be saying, "Hey, I'm speaking these things, but the evidence is next to you." Right? The evidence isn't like this isn't me modeling it all up here for you, but how do we be a church that is flat, and that isn't just front centric. So anyway, going from denomination, ultimately probably a lot of the sickness of denomination has come from leaders that get big heads. If I'm going to go full circle with what we're talking about.
Well done. Nicely done.
There we go.
I had one conversation with your dad, Dave.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly memorable and humbling. And I found him intimidating in the best way. I had delusions of being like a Christian rock star at one point in my life. And was really struggling with, okay, how do I reconcile, because all the bands that I listened to were secular, and there's the music is not necessarily worship music per se. Like you wouldn't play it in a church, but it's Christian music in the sense that I'm a Christian. It's written from a Christian worldview, and so I was conflicted, and I was like, well, if you listen to it, you're not necessarily going to know that we're believers and that we're followers of Christ. But do I want people to know that about us? Would that potentially hinder any success in music? Yes, I want people to know that about us because, Christ has done more for me than anybody else. So to turn my back on that truth. So how do I do this? And the example of that, the only example that I could think of that I had access to was the Coffee Oasis, whereas this incredible organization who was doing something for all people, for anybody who wanted to walk through the door, because you guys do focus in on homeless youth, but you serve coffee to anybody. I don't think there's any doubts in our community as to what the heart of Coffee Oasis is, and there's a Christ-centeredness there, I believe, and so I was like, how do they? And there's at least a perception of success in both realms. One realm being loyal to Christ, but also something that is beneficial for all people. And I was like, maybe I'll just see if whoever is running Coffee Oasis will give me, 30 minutes. Yeah. And I don't remember how I got a hold of your dad, but I did. And I had no idea how much I was asking, and how busy he was. Yeah. But he sat down with me for 25, 30 minutes or so. And I asked him these questions, and I could tell that he was sacrificing a lot just to talk to me and just to spend some time, going over something that to me was just a question and it was a theory, but for him, I could tell, I was like, oh man, this guy's been on the front line of a freaking war of some kind. Yeah. And he looks tired from combat almost. Yeah. And I'm just, right. And I'm asking these questions, Yeah,
theoretically. You're still dealing with theory.
Yeah. And he was like, I have to go to my next, I have someone else to talk to. And I was like, okay, thank you. And I walked away from that thinking like,
that's real. Yeah.
Like that was, it was also it was humbling and intimidating, but very beautiful to me and kind of transformative and gave a whole nother weight to what Christ is calling us to do. I don't think I've never had a conversation like that in my life, and I will be surprised if I ever have another one like that. I learned so much in he probably didn't even remember it by the time he was, 6 months removed from it. He probably didn't even remember that. But How has his life impacted you in what you're doing in ministry?
Yeah, there's a biography of Dorothy Day, might be our autobiography, called it's called The Long Loneliness, and I think that describes really well.
Who's Dorothy Day? Sorry.
Dorothy Day, she started the Catholic Workers Movement.
Okay. I only recently heard about that.
Yeah.
But yes, okay.
She known for her sacrificial social action. I think that describes really well the ministry I learned from my parents, that if God's calling you to something, the point might just be following him. It also might be more than that. God might do something beyond your wildest dreams. Coffee Oasis, we never thought would grow to what it became, and we never thought Refuge would be. And so I learned, for lack of a better word, kind of an unsexy ministry that is deeply satisfying and I think reveals the heart of Jesus. Because you were sharing how you came asking these very theoretical questions, like what kept coming to mind, and maybe it was going through my dad's mind, was I think we try to be too clever, and that wasn't Jesus, and that's not what he calls us to. He just calls us to be his followers.
I've always thought I was clever.
And sorry, I don't mean that to be.
But it's something I need to hear. It's something all clever people need to hear.
But we're trying to mastermind what will give us more followers or give us the break.
Right.
And I think we need to ask, what does faithfulness look like to the thing God's calling me? With the awkward self that God's made me, with my strengths and weaknesses, and making peace that if we do that all out, with the abilities, capacity he's given us, meaning that a lot of people reach beyond their capacity and end up burning out because they're taking on this load that they've actually taken on more that Jesus is carrying, and so they're carrying all this stuff, right? So if we, with the capacity he's given us and the time he's given us and the abilities he's given us, I mean, God could build something far beyond us. We never thought we'd have 90 employees, and we did. And that was an act of faithfulness. The long loneliness there was 12 years of us doing it as a family, with sometimes my dad working other jobs, supporting Coffee Oasis from his paycheck versus getting a paycheck from it, volunteers. Wow. It was 12 years before we ever hired a single staff just to work with youth. Wow. And by that time, there was this huge equity of trust from the community who had seen lives transformed by this group of people who didn't have a shelter. They had a home, and they were welcoming kids into their home. And so I'm probably the most discouraging person, I'm sure my dad was, when people ask us, how do you make something like the Coffee Oasis, who want to start a coffee shop mission? Because I tell them, you need to be ready for a dozen years where no one recognizes what you're doing, and the churches think you're crazy, and the community thinks you're crazy.
You might think you're crazy.
Yeah, the police think you're crazy. I mean, literally, we after that dozen years, when we were moving into Paulsbo, a police officer in Paulsbo who was working in Bremerton when we started said, we were so skeptical. She said, this is the question we were wondering. Why are all the bad kids going to the Coffee Oasis? And the churches were wondering that too. Everybody was wondering why.
It's an oasis of crime.
But isn't it funny how we kind of beautify the story of Jesus? That it's like all of a sudden the prostitute and the tax collector are popular figures.
Right.
You're like, no, the questions they were answering are, why are these bad people spending time with Jesus, the drunks, And so 12 years of people thinking that we were off the rails, people in the church community thinking that we had lost our way, people in the community wondering, why are you there? Are you taking advantage of these kids? Just skepticism. And that's why a lot of things don't start, is because people are trying to find their next break. They're not just saying, man, is God calling me to this? Is God calling me to this?
That's exactly what I realized about myself after talking to your dad.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
Yep.
I was exposed to my own delusion a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the model that I've been able to appreciate more and more as I've grown older is my dad's faithfulness in doing things where there was no glamour
Well, and
to
you
it.
strike me as somebody who could have done anything that he wanted to do.
There was other opportunities.
Yeah.
But there's something to just being where you see.
Was there ever
God
a
opening the
resistance to
door.
joining your dad in Coffee Oasis?
Yeah,
Carrying
so
on the
that's.
mantle,
I mean,
as
I
it
don't know
were?
how much time we have. That's a whole nother story.
Have we already gone an hour? Oh, we've gone just about an hour, haven't we?
I'll try to make that quick, but it is a significant part
We'll
of my
have to
story.
have you back. Because I know we've had a lot of great guests on, and we're like, we've got this podcast nuzzled into our lives so that it's hopefully not stealing time, from anybody. Guests,
I love it.
Producer, hosts, short and sweet.
Yeah, well, and thank you.
But no, I want you to say what you were going to say.
I'll wrap that up. I'll make it short.
I would have kept on going if you hadn't. I would have. I lose track of time. Adam's not here, so we'll go 3 hours.
So I went. This brings me back to going. I went to Washington State University to study philosophy.
That's cool.
Since I was a child, if you asked me at 4 years old what I wanted to do, I would have told you be a pastor. Felt the call to be a pastor since I was 4 years old. I have pictures of me with my dad. That I remember those moments. Just so proud that he was a pastor and wanting to be a pastor. Bibles from as soon as I could read that were just torn up and highlighted, and always loved God's word. Just one of the ways God made me. And I also saw my dad walk through a lot of hurt in the church. And when we started Coffee Oasis, it was really, we saw it going to where Jesus would have been. Had he been in Bremerton in 1997, he would have been probably at a little coffee shop sharing a meal with some people. And
and if we're listening to his Holy Spirit, for all intents and purposes, that's where he's at.
Us. Well, and I guess I've learned that he hasn't abandoned the church, which was where my story kind of ended up. Was I had to go through a lot of years of healing because we experienced something that was beautiful and authentic in our house church. I loved it. We never desired more. I think that's one of the takeaways. I hope when people hear about Coffee Oasis and they see it, wow, you did this and that, or Refuge, is we never desired more. In not desiring more, I think something that my dad did well, and I hope to do well too, is to be really faithful when more is given. Because if you don't desire more and then more is given, you can really screw up a lot of people's lives if you don't take that seriously. And so how to grow with that and be a leader that can lead a capacity, a lot of people, create the systems and structures and administration and, which is his own thing. But so house church, loved it, grew up loving the ministry at Coffee Oasis, loving the interaction with kids on the street. And they're asking questions that should be getting talked about in the church, and they're not. I found them getting talked about in the philosophy classroom. So went to school to study philosophy, thought I was going to go on to teach philosophy in the university, and kind of made this bargain with God after I left that I got accepted to Denver Seminary and was going to do a track there in philosophy. And so I was like, okay, I'll do both, I had been there a couple months living with my brother. Week before classes started at Denver Seminary, I was in a coffee shop, and one of the few times in my life I really clearly got direction from God. And in no uncertain terms, felt God telling me to be back in Bremerton. So I literally next day, was packed up and headed back to Bremerton. Wow. Never went to a class at Denver Seminary. And got back, and the Coffee Oasis was just my dad. And it was not, I'd started a college ministry at WSU and all these things that people were like, you're going to do this and that. So I'm back here in Bremerton doing like part-time delivery of coffee. I have like
starting over.
My bachelor's. I was going on to get my master's. I felt like
wow.
all these things, and so the narrative in your head is like, you could have been great,
Right?
And so I remember very clearly that first year, people asking me over and over again, "Hey, you're back in Bremerton. What's going on?" And me saying,
"What's wrong?"
Yeah, basically, have you washed up? What's going on? And so I remember saying, "Well, I'm giving it a year," and I remember over and over again feeling the Holy Spirit just say, "You're not leaving after. You're gonna die here. This is it."
Wow.
And some people put in that time and don't get to see the why. But in 6 months, we got our first major grant, which allowed us to hire 3 full-time workers. And so I was able to be hired full-time to lead outreach for Coffee Oasis. And we started really growing and got the joy of working with my dad to build Coffee Oasis.
What year was
literally like that. So I came back in 2008.
Okay.
Then 2009, we got our first grant, and that year got the drive through and started growing pretty quickly from there. And the church started growing pretty rapidly at that point too, which has had its spurts. But it was, we were able just to see these long years of planting and watering with tears, start growing in a way that we never thought would happen. So that's how I ended up coming back to be with my dad and working here. And I honestly didn't think I'd be back in Bremerton, but I do feel like it's been a gift to, at such a young age, profoundly feel that sense of calling and get to work with my dad for over a decade, and then take over Coffee Oasis. I worked as the executive director for 5 years after he passed away, and then got to hand that off to him. That's the full circle conversation, man. But the wild thing is we feel like we're just getting started, really. When we get in the sanctuary, we've not yet really invited anyone to be a part of the church, and people are already finding it. So it's just, I'm so excited genuinely, because it feels like we're healthy, and it's growing because people are enjoying Jesus, not because we're doing marketing campaigns. And that feels really good, and it feels like something that we can be healthy and be a part of something that's growing. So, well,
I want to be like that too.
Yeah,
I want to be like.
It's not all rosy. I know that was a nice little bow I tied there.
I love that. Well, I was talking with Adam about this podcast today, and we were talking about okay, how do we grow it? Yada yada yada, and just like, and then we wrapped up the conversation with, are we having fun? And are we content with where God has us? And just because that is always, I was struggling with it with music, and your dad and a few other people, helped me gain perspective on that, and now doing another creative outlet. And there's so many podcasts out there. I think, I'm happy to take a note from your book, learn from this conversation, and be content with whatever God does give us, and not try to make it something, not try to put it in our image, but allow him to make it whatever it is.
Yeah. We don't know what God will do with it, but especially those years leading both organizations, and it did feel like beyond our capacity. My wife and I, our thing we kept coming back to is like, let's just be healthy people. And if we're healthy people, come what may, whether these things grow or shrink, like we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And as it's grown, like hopefully we'll be models of Christ in the little way we can be. Because I don't want to gain the world and lose my soul. And so many people do that because they think what God wants from us is more numbers. And crazy thing is he actually just wants us to love him.
Well, if you ever tune in to No Buzzwords and you feel like Adam and I are getting too big for our britches,
Okay.
tell us that we need to have you back on.
There we go.
Be humbled. Well, for the Refuge, is there anything that you want to say to cap things off? What time do people, like, you guys got Sunday school in the morning? What time do people want to show up?
Well, the excitement is coming on Easter because we do a brunch. We're actually doing, as much as I'm still young, even though my wife reminds me that I'm going to turn 40 this year. I love old school things. Like we're doing a sunrise service this year.
Sweet.
And people are like, what is that? And the old people are like, oh, we know.
You know what a service is. You know what a sunrise.
But we are calling it a sunrisen service because we're not so old school that people still wake up early. We're doing that in brunch and if people want to come, 10 o'clock is services, and we're just wrapping up the Book of Lamentations.
Oh, sweet!
Which has
we'll
been
make sure to come
the
after
journey
that,
of our souls, and then we'll be diving back into we are in the Sermon on the Mount after that. So
sweet.
Yep. So come on out.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming on, and we'll have you on some other day, hopefully.
Sounds good. I enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Yeah.